We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. Always a great pleasure and honor to welcome to the program the author of the best-selling Nixonland, Before the Storm, The Invisible Bridge, all three of those, I should say, and writer Rick Perlstein. Rick, thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be here, Sam. This is my daily act of resistance.
Yeah, well, we'll do it for as long as we're here, I guess. I mean, who knows what happens next? So your piece in the Washington Spectator, the hustlers, hacksters, hacks, and cowards who helped elect Donald Trump, and I think there are a multitude of reasons why Donald Trump became president. The press, you argue, is the one that historians more than others are going to look back upon. Why that?
Yeah, I'm not really as interested as, kind of pinning blame on what the, ultimate cause of Trump's election is, as what Trump generally, both his election, his transition, and his impending presidency, means for the civic life of the United States and our ability to, reason together and govern ourselves as a republic. What makes it so striking, even, kind of since writing the piece, even doing a little more reading, I've come to a little more clarity on the issue, especially with the amazing commentary of Masha Gessen, who was born in the Soviet Union, moved to the United States to become a journalist, then moved back to Russia to report there, and then had to move back to the United States because she and her gay partner have children, and she was terrified for her life and safety there. So Masha Gessen has been saying that the big picture is that how authoritarians onto totalitarians rule is by lying systematically and making disinformation their way to make it impossible to discern an accurate picture of reality. And that by so doing, by debasing the currency of truth itself, they position themselves in a way so they can create their own truth, the better to aggrandize their own power. And that's what's happening. So the routines of journalism, the professional routines, the things that you get rewarded for as a mainstream journalist that makes you successful, is absolutely unable to deal with that. So that's why I say what is required is a literal paradigm shift in how news is covered. Because if you just pick apart each claim he makes and say he says this, other people say that, et cetera, you are actively abetting his game of just basically not seeing what he's actually doing, not reporting the truth, which is that this is a systematic campaign to make it impossible to understand what the truth is. So journalists, and let's be very clear, by understanding themselves to be reporting the truth, are actually getting us farther away from the truth.
Now, by systemic plan, does that mean that is in his intent, or is it just simply that is what he's putting out there because of I don't know, a personality defect, and it is being and then that's those around him and our system is ingesting it in such a way that it is a systemic problem?
Well, let's move it away from just the consideration of Trump as an individual, although he's the leader and he bears, absolute and total responsibility. Let's look at, the people around him. For example, someone like Steve Bannon,
right,
who in an amazing profile last year by Josh Green in Bloomberg is revealed to be basically a disinformation specialist. That he's has like a very sophisticated multi-pronged strategy to debase the currency of truth as reported in the news media, an inside-outside strategy. Let's talk about Trump's, kind of grassroots followers, these, people on Twitter who sit around in war rooms and think about how they can invent lies and broadcast them and turn them into apparent truths. Let's talk about let's talk about the fake news industry, and not even getting into the question of what Russia has to do with it. Talk about the people who created fake news stories either as a business model because people click on them and then they distribute them, and even when they get debunked, that becomes a way of getting clicks. But people who have literally made it their vocation to deliberately introduce false information into the public sphere. So it's all this stuff, and
right.
It's all kind of orbiting around Trump, right? So is Trump a damage guy? Does Trump think he's telling the truth when, he says he's saving 1,100 jobs when he's really only saving 500? Or is Trump, what is he doing when he says that Boeing, has a $2 billion contract, to make Air Force One when, I was listening to Michael Savage, the crazy fascist right-wing talk radio guy, and he was even kind of debunking this, saying he couldn't find any evidence of this. What's going on in Trump's head? I don't know.
And it doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter.
Right? But what the media needs to do is think about how to represent what is happening in reality to people, so they can use this as citizens. And they cannot do this by fact-checking every claim, by having one person say it and another person say
refute
it's wrong.
Right.
They need to make the disinformation the narrative about the Trump presidency.
All right, I want to return back to that, because I want to keep talking a little bit more about this problem, because on some level, right, and I know that you're a fully conscious. We have seen this on the right for a long time, right? Outfits like Breitbart have existed for a long time. It's just that now, I think, with the rise of social media, and not just Twitter, but I also think like YouTube. I think, one of the big stories I think that has not been covered is really sort of what YouTube has done for that. It's the same sort of situation where you have people who are incentivized, but it's another channel. Alex Jones, for instance, if he was still exclusively on radio, he would have a far less reach, despite the fact that radio, permeates more than maybe YouTube, but it's not shared in the same manner. You don't have the ability to sort of port it to other people in the same manner. And I would argue there are other, there's a lot of people like me out there who, sort of add to that cacophony as well on YouTube. But I also wanted you to even take a broader perspective in the sense that there's no, and I guess the media is supposed to play this role, but there doesn't seem to be even the subsidiary institutions which have the ability to provide some type of watershed and say like, hey, no, this doesn't, it occurs to me that the media, while the media, and we can talk about this, about how the media, some elements of the media reported well on Trump, others just sort of, were ultimately an advertisement for it. But it seems to me that had Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, for instance, and they have no incentive to do that, but had they come out and said, no, we're not going to cross this line, then the media would have taken a harsher position. Or had there been other institutions that had stepped up, but we don't have those institutions anymore in this country.
So they're following the Grover Norquist theory. He said once, all we need in the president is someone who has a working right arm to sign the legislation.
And they were right.
So that's the deal that Paul Ryan has made, right?
Yep.
Let's talk about those institutions. This morning on Morning Edition, which specifically as a show has been a terrible offender. I find, like, whoever it is running All Things Considered at night, they do a pretty good job. But Morning Edition, for some reason, has been particularly meretricious. They had a long interview with Sean Spicer, who's an RNC spokesman. And a lot of people, I talked to a conservative here in Chicago where I live. He said, well, the grown-ups will take control of Trump and they won't let him get away with this stuff. So the grown-ups is the Republican Party. And this guy, Sean Spicer, was on RNC basically attacking the media for reporting that Trump lied about the number of jobs that he's saving and saying, you just don't understand Trump. You just don't understand how profoundly he's resonating with the people, which of course is a disinformation campaign in itself, claiming that he has this enormous mandate. And then he went ahead, and said, when he was asked about, Trump's conflict of interest, well, we'll just listen to what he says on, his press conference next week on December 15th. So here's a guy, when people like, Nate Silver, at 538 were reporting on the nomination campaign, they were very enamored of this book called The Party Decides, which is a political science book basically saying the parties as strong institutions can get in the way of a demagogue getting the nomination. That was, obviously completely wrong. The party doesn't decide. The party is following, in the case of the Republican Party, they're whoring after power, right? You can look at something like the FBI, which is obviously supposed to be a bulwark institution supporting the rule of law, absolutely, leapfrogging over the rule of law when it came to, Comey's interventions in the election. So all these institutions have weakened. That's a phenomenon that we've seen in our politics for decades. And then we have this guy who's kind of willing to take advantage of the fact that so many of these things that kind of keep us able to communicate with each other and govern ourselves are based not on laws or even formal rules, but norms. So that's another thing the press has to kind of make the center of the story, that they're willing to, that he's willing to violate norms. But they have their own norms. And one of those norms is that if you are leading one of the major parties, you're not allowed to say that those parties are breaking norms.
Hey, it's Sam Seder. Why don't you subscribe to this channel? You can do so right over here. Over. Subscribe.